When I was young, under 5, my parents were still together, and my younger brother and I spent a lot of time together at our dad's brother's and father's house. My dad's brother had 4 kids, so we spent a lot of time there with our cousins. There was a bedroom that was converted into our playroom, just a smallish room with lots of toys. We would always have weird feelings in there, but one time in particular, a few of us were standing in the middle of the room, when all of a sudden, the toys started moving on their own. Items pushed far into a shelf, moved forward before falling off to the ground. It all happened in slow motion, like an invisible string was pulling everything to the center of the room. We were creeped out, to say the least, and told the adults, who somewhat dismissed it. Another time, I was playing with a stuffed lion in the playroom. I put it in this little wooden shelf and locked it. I went out to the living room where everyone else was, then went back to the room to find the shelf unlocked and the lion 3 feet away from the door. I was around 4 at this point and remember being angry at whoever was moving it and started asking everyone back in the living room if they had done so. They said no, and to ask our cousin. My older cousin, who was 10 at the time, was in his room with music playing loudly and was annoyed that I had even knocked on his door. It certainly wasn't him. One of the scariest memories I have was in this house as well. I just get chills thinking back to it. I was sharing the bottom bunk with a cousin of mine. The door was open and faced out to the hallway. I'll never forget the dark silhouette of a man turning from the living room down this hallway and started walking down the hall towards us. We were both awake and looked at each other scared. He had red glowing eyes and was very tall, but somehow resembled our grandfather's figure. He looked as if he was staring at us down the hallway and then stopped and turned into the playroom. We told our dads about it the next day, and I remember my dad picking me up to explain how tall he was. My parents divorced, and I haven't seen my father in over 15 years. My biological grandfather is dead, and I don't communicate with those cousins anymore. All that I know is that I never want to see that house again. During my senior year of high school, I found myself living with my aunt to wrap up the final 3 weeks before graduating early. The household consisted of my aunt, her husband, and my 11-year-old cousin, Harriet, and myself. The setting was a rural area, and the house, a relic from the era of slavery, stood tall with its 2 stories. It had a main staircase leading to my aunt and uncle's room, and one shared by me and my cousin. A balcony nestled between the 2 connected them. Additionally, a second staircase led to what was called the servants' quarters, a part under construction separated from the rest of the house and accessible only through that particular staircase. One day while under quarantine due to my father contracting COVID-19, I found myself home alone. My cousin, aunt and uncle were hours away picking up my other cousin from the airport with her husband. My cousin Harriet had often pestered me with tales of 2 sisters who owned the house during its plantation days, insisting the house was haunted. Though I usually dismissed these stories, that made me question their validity. It was in the early afternoon around 3 p.m., still light outside, as I immersed myself in drawing and music on my laptop. I had my headphones on, playing music loudly enough, though it sounded like a speaker if I were to take them off. This was my usual routine when alone. However, on this particular day, a loud thud interrupted the music, even through my headphones. Taking them off, I looked up, suspecting a squirrel or some critter. When the noise persisted, I put my headphones back on, only for the thud to return a few minutes later. Growing annoyed, I decided to investigate. The thud seemed to have come from outside the room, as if on the balcony. Yet I knew the entrance to the balcony was sealed and had been unused for years. Leaving the room, I checked the balcony through the window on the door, but found nothing. Frustrated, I returned to the bedroom, determined to finish my work. Yet as soon as I sat down, the thud echoed from the other side of my cousin's closet, where the sealed servants' quarters were. Thinking my family had returned, I decided to take a break, and as I descended the stairs to investigate, there was no car in sight. I was still alone. Suppressing my instincts to flee, I ventured upstairs to the sealed area. In the pitch-dark space, illuminated only by my phone's flashlight, I saw a woman walking in a perfect circle, thin and tall with dark, stringy hair and a tattered dress. She stopped abruptly when the light hit her. The sound of her neck cracking filled the eerie silence as she turned to look at me. I raced down the stairs, locking the door behind me. There was desperate pounds against the door as I sprinted to the bathroom, locking myself in and curling up in the bathtub. Terrified, I called my aunt, who never answered. I stayed in the tub until my family returned, emerging only when I heard them calling for me. I recounted the terrifying encounter to my aunt, to which she casually responded, "So you met Maggie? Don't mind her, it's best to ignore her. She won't hurt you. She just likes to try and scare people." To this day, I've never encountered Maggie again, and I refuse to spend the night at their house. They've since connected the servants' quarters to the top floor and removed the wall between Harriet's closet and the eerie space, creating a connection, which I personally am hesitant to explore. The ancient history of my grandfather's house, standing for over 200 years, is marked by a tapestry of mysterious events. Originally offering refuge to soldiers during World War II, the shadows of their presence still linger, with one soldier disappearing without a trace. The house later served as an old restaurant, adding layers of history and intrigue. About 4 decades ago, my grandfather stumbled upon an old cross discarded in the trash. Little did he know that its restoration would unleash a series of inexplicable occurrences. After weeks of restoration, the atmosphere within the house shifted dramatically. Mary and Jesus pictures swayed without any apparent cause, and the entire house trembled as if stirred by an unseen force, despite the absence of wind or earthquakes in Bavaria where the house stood. Mysterious sounds also emanated from the basement, further adding to the enigma. In an attempt to distance the unsettling events, my grandfather affixed the restored cross to a nearby tree. Since then, an eerie fog perpetually surrounds the area near the tree. The supernatural occurrences, however, escalated when my grandmother succumbed to cancer. A particular incident following her passing was a call from her disconnected phone to the living room, where only labored breathing echoes could be heard before the connection was abruptly severed. The contract for the phone was inexplicably terminated. December 2015 marked the passing of my grandfather, leaving the house with its unsettling history. Fast forward to 2023, and I find myself entangled in a series of paranormal encounters, adding new chapters to the story. One night, a friend and I ventured to the house at 11 p.m. As we entered the kitchen, a series of unexplainable events unfolded. A knock on the door, a loud bang, and phantom footsteps that we heard upstairs left us in a state of panic. Despite investigating, we found no trace of the mysterious occurrences, prompting us to leave as quickly as possible. There's a second story, where a colleague and I gathered in the living room, when all of a sudden, loud bangs and footsteps echoed from above. While my friend waited anxiously outside, I ventured upstairs alone, petrified, but found no source for the unsettling sounds. My third story. Curiosity led a friend and me to set up cameras in the hallway, capturing the strange happenings. We used 2 phones recording simultaneously from different perspectives, and somehow they mysteriously fell to the floor, pointing towards the ceiling, both at the same time and cutting off the video feed at the same time as it happened. The next story was during a nocturnal visit. A friend and I explored the second floor. Reviewing the footage later revealed a hand and face in an open door, though our subsequent search of the rooms yielded no presence, and the recordings have since vanished. Childhood memories resurfaced when my cousin and I stayed overnight. That's when we heard loud scratching on the front door. What initially seemed like a prank intensified when the scratching persisted during our conversation. My mother's 2-month stay in the house after her separation was marred by discomfort, unwelcome feelings, and unnerving experiences. Sleep paralysis, footsteps, and unexplained noises prompted her swift departure. The spectral activities persist, manifesting in lights flickering, doors opening anonymously, and objects shifting, and unsettling feelings to anyone who dares brave its depths. Each visit unveils a new mystery, prompting me to document it all with my camera, seeking answers. But I'm curious to ask if anyone has experienced anything remotely similar to me. My partner and I moved into a rental property in Yokine, Western Australia, about 30 years ago. We were in our mid-20s and rented directly from the landlord, who was a cop. Upon entering the house, to the left were 2 bedrooms and the front of the house, and, at the end of the hallway, a long, rumpus room with its own bathroom and toilet. The kitchen and lounge room were to the right of the front door, and behind the kitchen and dining room was an enclosed patio with a bar. The landlord had left part of his uniform in the hallway cupboard, which we thought were odd: a formal jacket, his cap, and some other police things I can't remember. We decided to take the rumpus room and make it our bedroom, as it was spacious and had an ensuite. There were framed football memorabilia stuck directly to the walls. We levered off the plaques, plastered the damage, and repainted the walls. I used one of the front rooms as my wardrobe. The other front room was never used, not even for storage. It was an uncomfortable room that we never entered and always kept the door closed. That just had a bad feeling. When I was cooking, I would turn away from the stove, only to return to find the gas turned up. I would complain to my boyfriend to stop messing with my cooking, but it wasn't him. When we were in the lounge room, we would hear noises from the kitchen cupboards and put down baits, thinking we had rats. But the noises never stopped, and the traps were never triggered. We had a friend over one night, and at some stage he started furiously waving his hands over his head. We asked him what was wrong, and he said there was some sort of electrical thing over his head. My boyfriend and I just stared at each other. We had never mentioned it, but we had both experienced it too. It was somewhere between radio static and an electrical hum. From time to time, the sound would appear like a cloud of noise over your head. One day I noticed that this weird, green, kind of slimy mold was all over my shoes. None of my other clothes were affected. I looked at my bike, which I also kept in that room, and it was also covered with his weird mold. I've never seen mold grow on metal before or since. My armchair in the back enclosed patio was covered in this mold. No other piece of furniture in the entire house had the mold. Our cat was missing for a day. I searched high and low and eventually found him dead behind the bar in the patio area. This was interesting, as he refused to ever go there. So why would he crawl there to die? One night my boyfriend fell down on his face in the lounge room. I was terrified, as he was obviously in a great deal of distress. They called an ambulance and was taken to hospital. He had suffered a heart attack in his mid-20s. We had enough and decided to move out. As we were loading our van, the man across the road came over for a chat, as we'd become friendly with him. He said that no one ever seemed to live in that house for long. He said that the cop who bought that place was only there for 2 weeks before he took off. He then told us that years ago his best mate lived in that house. He was a bit of a bugger who hated women, authority, and cats. But he loved his football. He worshipped it, and died on a grand final day when he fell down and died in the lounge from a heart attack. So is this a ghost story, or an unusual set of occurrences? Only you can decide. What I can tell you is that I slept so well once I moved away, I didn't even realize how poor my sleep had been until I was gone. I think we pissed off the entity when we got rid of his memorabilia. I think he hated me. I think he killed my cat. And I think he affected my boyfriend. When I tell you this house has frightened skeptics, I mean it. The number of times I've been chased down the hall by something only I can hear, the voices mimicking family members from around the house, especially from the closet. Seeing family members walk around the house when you know you're home alone. People staying over, just to end up leaving in the middle of the night because there's a man at the foot of their bed that won't go away. Doors slamming shut, doorknobs shaking. I could go on for hours. We were throwing a Halloween party one year, and we all watched a woman in a nightgown walk through the backyard and vanish into the cypress tree. One night, I was boiling an egg and accidentally burnt myself with the water. Clear as a bell, I heard someone say, "Stupid cow," whispered from the dark dining room. And that's even without getting into the tapping on the windows and doors that if you go check will lead you on a wild goose chase all over the house, and the black spots on the walls by the stairs, where a black head comes through the wall sometimes. This is my spouse's childhood home, and when they were little, it was way worse. They were kicked down the stairs a lot. My mother-in-law was carrying them down when they were a baby, and she got pushed down the stairs. Had she not instinctively curled around them, they would have been killed. Both of us have woken up to the feeling of someone getting into bed with us right in the middle of us. One time a friend of my spouse's was sleeping on the couch downstairs, and she ended up sleeping in her car because she kept getting grabbed and hit. We don't even know why it's this bad. There haven't been that many owners, and as far as everyone knows, no one has died in the house. But my spouse was good friends with the neighbor's kid when they were growing up. Apparently, their house is also pretty scary. The house seems to add ghosts with time. We've always been cat people. My spouse always had cats, and it seems a few of them have stayed because we see them walking around the house a lot. It's honestly the most light-hearted thing that goes on here, and they aren't shadows either. You can tell which cat it is because of how clearly we see them. Their grandmother passed from COVID in the early days. She was a mean, miserable and scary woman, and since her passing really late at night / early in the morning, we see her wandering around upstairs, hunched and small, like she was in life. One night last December, I was up late, sick. I went to the bathroom and the doorknob started to rattle, because she used to do that just before opening it. We always locked it, and I've never gotten out the habit. It rattled and shook until I said her name. "Helen, stop it!" Then I opened the door to go back to bed, and she was standing at the end of the hall, staring at me with a mean look, like she used to give me before she'd lash out. I pressed my back into the wall and walked the whole way back to our bedroom, never breaking eye contact. That night, we just know not to go into the backyard at this point. The lights never work, no matter how many times we replace them or rewire them. So it's pitch black out there most nights, but sometimes when you look through the kitchen window or the sliding glass doors, you'll see a big shadow person, darker than the darkness around them. The other night my spouse saw one that was around 7 feet tall, solid darkness, and then they just darted away. A few weeks ago, I was downstairs making a late night snack, and it was a beautiful full moon night. The backyard was lit up in that silvery blue way that only the moon can do, and in the pool was a hooded dark figure standing there watching me. I didn't even finish making my food. I just shut the stove off, turned out the lights and went upstairs. We're hoping to move at some point soon. From the ages of 13 to 16, my life was marked by inexplicable and unsettling experiences in the eerie grey one-story house I called home. Nestled near a railroad, the place had always exuded an odd vibe, making it difficult to feel at ease. Whether it was the perpetual chaos within its walls or something more supernatural, an uncomfortable tension lingered. Strange occurrences became commonplace. Footsteps echoed through the halls and whispers floated in the air. At first, I dismissed them as a product of my overactive imagination, for I was no believer in the supernatural. However, one particular night shattered my skepticism. It was 3 in the morning, and though my sleep wasn't too deep, I was abruptly awakened by a blood-curdling scream directly in my ear. It felt as if someone had positioned themselves next to me, unleashing a terrifying sound. My immediate thought was to check on my niece and mother, sleeping in the adjacent living room, suspecting one of them may be in distress. But to my surprise, they were both peacefully asleep, oblivious to the scream that had pierced the night. As I returned to my room, a chilling sight awaited me. A black shadow figure sat on my bed, its attention fixed on the spot where I had been sleeping. When it turned to face me, its eyes were pure white, no iris or pupil, just an unsettling void. Attempting to rationalize the situation, I convinced myself that it was a trick of the dark. However, as I neared my bed, the figure rose and silently advanced towards me. A sense of dread enveloped me as I realized this was no mere illusion. The figure, with its figureless silhouette and haunting white eyes, met me halfway between my bed and the door. Just as I grasped the reality of what stood before me, it began to fade into nothing, and in the blink of an eye it was gone, leaving me bewildered and on edge. As I lay there, attempting to shake off the encounter, the unsettling atmosphere persisted. Faint scratching sounds on the walls only added to my unease, but I chose to ignore them, desperately trying to drift back to sleep. The next morning I cautiously approached my niece and inquired about her night. She reassured me that she hadn't experienced any nightmares. Hesitant to reveal the full extent of my nocturnal ordeal, I shared only the part about me checking on them. My mother, oblivious to the supernatural, appreciated the gesture, but dismissed any notion of a scream. As time passed, it became evident that my haunting experience was not isolated. My sister recounted sightings of an old woman darting in her room, and her face appeared in the glass doors by the fireplace. The landlady's deceased mother, who had lived in the house before us, was the likely candidate for the haunting. We eventually left that particular house, and with our departure, the paranormal activity ceased. Though 7 years have passed, I still wonder if the supernatural entity followed us to our new residence. Fortunately, the ambience here is markedly different, devoid of any eerie signs despite the passage of time. The memories of the old house linger forever though, etched in my mind, as a place where reality and the paranormal intersected in mysterious ways. When I rented a house in Waterbury, Connecticut, I came to the delightful discovery that it was haunted. Shortly after I moved in, my roommate and I became aware the house had a problem. The rear family room was temporarily half filled with unpacked boxes from the move. I was in my bedroom upstairs on the left side of the hallway, and my roommate took one of the bedrooms on the right. I heard the entry door open and slam shut, followed by footsteps on the tiled floor, and the sound of a little girl sobbing. Weird. Goosebumps went up my body, and all the hairs on my arms and neck raised up. I held my breath and listened more intently. The crying seemed to fade away, and then I was startled by my roommate walking into the hallway out of his bedroom. I asked him, "Did you hear that?" And he looked at me confused. "What?" I told him what I heard and he said he hadn't. Great, maybe I'm just crazy or tired from the move. I get up from my chair and walk to the hallway and look downstairs and see all the lights are off. My roommate tells me this is his doing because we were upstairs. Why would we have the lights on downstairs? I tell him I'm going to go investigate the sounds and creep down the steps and run my hands on the wall looking for the light switch. First night in the new house. I find the light switch and end up flicking everything on. It's by the front door, so the porch light went on too. I look around and see another light switch down the hall next to the closet and the dark dining room. I flick on the light switch and walk in there. The room was freezing cold, and I see the back door. I click the switch by the back door, and the outside light goes on. I look into the family room, where I heard the sound coming from, and an eerie feeling washes over me, but I can't see anything. I then go to the living room and kitchen, click every damn switch I find. I can now see every room has light, but I find nothing. My roommate calls over to me from the second room, sarcasm in his voice. "Any ghosts or intruders?" I scan the house one more time. Whatever's in my line of vision and reply, "No." Close all the lights and head back upstairs, severely creeped out. Another occasion, my roommate was talking to his brother on the phone, and he was going to visit the next morning and check out the new place. Nothing happened that night, but in the morning, I woke up from the front door opening and slamming shut. I sat up in my bed as I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs, my bedroom door wide open. The top of the stairs is where my bedroom door is. No one can get by without me seeing them. The loud steps getting closer, I wait and remember my roommate's brother is supposed to visit. As the footsteps are now at the top of the stairs, I hear my roommate call out his brother's name. Dead silence. I call out his brother name too. Nothing. No response whatsoever, nor footsteps. I get out of bed and walk to the doorway. I see my roommate across the hall, just reach his doorway. No one is on the stairs. No one else is in the house. Just me and my roommate looking at each other in an empty staircase. We make eye contact and he says, "You heard that, right? The door, the footsteps. What the hell? Let me just check the house." So I run down the front door and see it's still locked. I call out, "Your brother doesn't even have a key. How could he get inside?" I can see the closet door from where I'm standing, and it's slowly opening like an inch or two. I gasp, frozen. Fight or flight kicks in, so I run into the closet violently and open the door to see nothing inside. I slam it shut, searched the house and found nothing. His brother did end up coming over, but much later, afternoon. We told him, and he said he didn't want to stay and got a bit scared. He said we needed to bless the house. I lived there for a little over a year and always heard doors, assuming it was my roommate. Oftentimes, I'd hear footsteps too. One night I was laying in bed and felt something enter my room, walk up to bed, crawl in bed with me and put an arm around my waist. Cuddle ghost? Because no one was there when I turned to see who the hell was cuddling me. This is my first time sharing this, and I hope some of you will believe me. My dad bought the neighbor's house when I was around 12. The neighbors built it in the 70s, so we knew no one had passed away in there or anything, but we have no idea what may have happened to the land before that. Before we even moved in, the neighbor's son woke up in the middle of the night, all blades flying off his ceiling fan. Multiple blades got stuck in the wall and one in the closet door. He ran to the closet and screamed until his parents came. There were still marks when they filled the holes in and we moved in. That room became my baby brother's nursery, and one day my stepmom needed to change him, but she didn't want to go all the way to the bedroom, so she asked for me to grab the diapers and wipes. When I walked into the room, a book flew off a stack of boxes that we hadn't unpacked and landed right in front of me directly under the fan. I stepped over it, grabbed what I needed, and ran out of that room. Multiple people in my family saw a shadow of a man in the hallway. The hallway was a long L-shaped hallway with only 2 lights. Me and 2 of my brothers slept in that room, at the very tip of the short side of the L. My dad's room was across from ours, and my baby brother's nursery was in between. We would see the man at the end of the hallway. We could never reproduce the shadow. It wasn't always there, and we had a tapestry on the wall right where he stood, and the shadow would be on top of the tapestry. One night when I was watching a movie and my 2 brothers were asleep, I saw the shadow of a man crawling into the room in the darkness. I thought it was my dad trying to scare us, which he often did, but he then opened the door to his room, and there was nothing there. Scared the absolute crap out of me, that did. There was also a woman that my dad and stepmom saw in the house, but I never saw her. She would peek around corners, and you could see her long hair swish. It scared my stepmom so bad one time, she fell while getting into the shower and broke a rib. Many of us also saw a little boy who would run through the dining room. I would catch glimpses of him out of the corner of my eyes, but my stepmom woke up one night to him standing over her before running off down the hallway. She said she would have written it off as one of my brothers, but the hallway had wood floors and there were no footsteps as he ran off. Eventually, my older brother moved into my dad's office. I got the nursery as my bedroom, and my 2 younger brothers started sharing the room with the bunk beds. One night, I was reading when my closet door randomly began opening and closing on its own. I said out loud, "Can you please not do this in my room?" It stopped, and miraculously, I never had any issues in my room again after that. My youngest brother, however, was about 2 or 3 now and began acting weird. He would walk out his bedroom and sit in the living room, and when asked why he wasn't in his room, he would say, "The man was in there." My dad obviously ran into the room, worried about an intruder, but there was no one there. This happened a few more times until one day my little brother walked straight into the closet by the front door, where his little baseball bat was, and when he was asked what he was doing, he said he was going to get the man out of his room. My dad just let him be, and they never talked about the man after that. I have so many more stories about that house. Weirdly enough, one of my brothers never saw anything, and my older brother only experienced a few things moving without explanation. When my dad moved, I was around 17. It all stopped. I didn't experience anything for a few years until I moved into a house in college with my boyfriend and another friend. But it was totally different. Doppelgangers, a helpful entity, and weird sightings of shadow people. My cousin also built a house on a piece of land they later found out was an abandoned graveyard that the developers reworked. I only visited once, but I saw a few things. They moved out pretty quickly. According to my grandmother, who had lots of issues and was an addict, so take it all with a grain of salt. The women in our family are sensitive to spirits, but it skips a generation. She claimed she was sensitive, her grandmother was, and when I told her about my dad's house, she said it was likely I was too. Our family is from New Orleans, so people really believe in that stuff here, and after years and years and hundreds of experiences, I can't deny that she may have been onto something. I first moved into my college home when I was 19. The house was built in 1926, and I live in a pretty sketchy area. I would hear, see, and feel things somewhat frequently in the home. It's an old house. I will normally just say aloud that this is my home. I don't welcome anything negative here whatsoever, and then I won't have any other experiences for a few months. I've only ever been truly scared inside the house once. I was in the bathroom, getting ready for a date. and I saw and heard the doorknob of the bathroom jiggle, like someone was trying to come in. I assumed my fiancé was just picking on me. I opened the door, and he wasn't there. He was in his office playing computer games. I told my fiancé multiple times about seeing and hearing things. I very frequently get that feeling on the back of my neck, like there's something in the room with me when I'm alone, or I'm being watched. He always just laughs and never believes me. Until this morning. We were both upstairs in bed. I was asleep. He was lying awake on his phone. Both of our dogs were asleep as well. There was this loud thud at about 3:30, maybe just before. It woke me and the dogs up. One of our dogs barked once, and the second was growling. My fiancé immediately jumped up, looked out the window and didn't see anything. He stepped out of the room and came back in, grabbed his gun, and told me to call the cops. The look on his face when he came back into the room told me everything I needed to know. Someone was inside our house. I called the cops. We both armed ourselves and we stayed on the line with the operator. He insists he heard and felt someone walking around downstairs, so much that he had me call the police, and he would never do that unless he genuinely thought someone was actually there. It took less than 5 minutes for 3 cops to arrive, and they had us meet them on the front porch. They came through and declared the whole house, other than the room that had the doggies in it, were empty. They couldn't find anything that could have made the noise. All the doors were dead-bolted, nothing downstairs was touched. The robot vacuum was stuck in the corner, but it wouldn't have made a noise that loud, and I went to check the app, and it had shut off at 3 on the dot. We looked everywhere, and couldn't find anything or replicate the noise at all. He stood at the top of the steps, and had me walk through the house, and he said it sounded exactly like it when I was walking, as if I was trying to sneak through the house, coming from the living room into the dining room. We can't explain it at all. We're used to hearing bangs and stuff outside and creaks in the house because it's old. But he said it sounded and felt exactly like someone was walking around downstairs, and the initial thud sounded like someone slamming on our doors downstairs with a vibration through the house. We do have cameras that didn't pick up any movement, unfortunately. And one more thing. He and I had just talked on Sunday afternoon about how I am convinced the house is haunted, and he denounced it entirely. So what are the odds that this would happen at 3:30 a.m. the following morning, when only he was awake? Has anyone ever experienced anything similar? If you're a cop, would you be annoyed responding to this call? We feel so bad and they probably think we're crazy. But can anyone try and help debunk this explanation? This particular tale unfolds within the walls of my family home, a structure rooted in the late 60s. To the best of our knowledge, no one has met their demise within these confines. Nevertheless, the abode is a haven for bizarre occurrences, with items vanishing and reappearing, doors asserting their autonomy, and sporadic cold spots manifesting throughout. An eclectic assortment of inexplicable phenomena. However, my favorite enigma transpires within my room, formerly belonging to my grandparents. Engaged in the task of redecorating and infusing my essence into the space, I faced the challenge of dismantling substantial wall adornments, 3 rather unsettling religious heavy metal engravings, and a sizable wooden cross, a relic I tolerate, though it doesn't particularly align with my taste. After replacing these items with my preferred decor, life resumed its usual course, until an eerie incident disrupted the norm. In the dead of night, I found myself abruptly awoken by the discerning sound of minute, weighty footsteps scampering beneath my bed. Pondering the possibility of it being a rodent, I cautiously investigated, armed with my phone's flashlight, ready to capture this intruder on video. To my bewilderment, there was nothing under the bed, and the ominous sound had vanished into thin air. Convinced it might be a fleeting dream, I returned to slumber. However, the same disconcerting phenomena reoccurred the following night and the night after that. Rationalizing that no rat could elude my feline huntress, I took a pragmatic step, restating the substantial wooden cross on one wall, accompanied by my risque literature and assortment of eerie masks. While the decorations exuded an unsettling aura, the mysterious footsteps ceased, leaving me to ponder the peculiar balance between the supernatural and tangible in my enigmatic abode. I grew up in a house built to the 1860s in upstate New York with zero problems. We bought this fixer-upper house here in Virginia built in the 80s, right before COVID. And let me tell you, I love scary stories, but have never encountered so many creepy things as I have in this house. First of all, 2 years ago, I was nursing my son at around 2 a.m. in our bed. My boyfriend always seemed to wake up with me and the baby during his infant days, and would just keep us company on his phone while our son ate. We were both very awake that night, chatting a little, and the dogs were sleeping in the living room. Suddenly we hear the dog's feet on the wooden floor and excitedly panting. Mind you, these are dogs who usually bark if someone enters the house who doesn't live there. Then we both hear a man's voice mumbling in our kitchen as if he's greeting our dogs. My boyfriend looks at me shocked and then springs up to check as I'm petrified. He sees nothing in the entire house. The next occurrence happens just a few months later. I'm alone in our large bedroom just putting things away and tidying things up before getting into bed. As I turn off the light switch, my boyfriend walks into the room, so he passed right by me. I didn't look straight at him but greeted him while turning down the covers. No answer. Still sidetracked with plugging in my phone and such, I ask him if he's coming to bed, as he was over on his side of the bed standing. He doesn't answer. I still wasn't looking at him. He likes to joke around with me, so I straight up ask, "Are you mad or messing with me right now?" As I finally look up, he ducks down by his side of the bed, and seriously, I just thought of picking up something our son had thrown down there and chucking it at him. I asked the same question again, and it was at that moment my actual boyfriend walks into the room and goes, "Who are you talking to?" At that moment, I had chills over every inch of my body, and he just shook his head like, "You're nuts, girl." Since then, there have been a few smaller things that happened. My son's toy went off in the living room once with no one around it. And one morning, my boyfriend came home from night shift and our laundry basket was in the middle of the kitchen. He thought I'd moved it there before bed, but I assured him I had no reason to. The reason I'm sharing this now is that I was just cooking in the kitchen and heard whistling behind me, and earlier today, I heard a human adult cough upstairs. Safe to say, I am freaked out. My neighbor is friends with the previous owner's first wife, and she used to live in our home. While she was visiting, I asked if she'd ever experienced anything in the home. She laughed and said, "Oh yeah, that's just Jimmy's brother." Jimmy being her ex-husband. I finally feel validated. I'd like to share the story of my grandparents' house, which is undoubtedly haunted. Erected in 1960, this residence stands atop a cemetery for African Americans from the era of slavery, long abandoned and nestled amidst dense woods. All the houses in this southern countryside are ensconced in the same eerie ambience. While my encounters with spirits date back to my early days, some recent paranormal experiences have heightened my awareness. Mysterious knockings echoing through unreachable corners of the house due to obstructing furniture. My great-grandmother, a 76-year-old diabetic with limited mobility, resides with my grandparents. Her handicapped condition prevents her from generating the knocks emanating from her room. The attic, a place of occasional disappearance of items, leaves my feline companions staring into the void. Though I've heard that animals can perceive ghosts, my paranoia remains within reasonable bounds. A recent incident involving a light falling from the ceiling a mere few months ago. The new and properly installed light inexplicably detached its covering. The puzzling occurrence in an infrequently visited attic lingers in my mind. My more recent ghost encounter dates back to the 4th of July during a family gathering. My cousins, more inclined to impress her boyfriend, engage in a prank near the woods. What began as a jest led us to a white, emaciated figure with disheveled hair. My impaired vision hindered a clear view of its face, but the creature ran towards us after our revelation. Fleeing in fright, I slipped in the wet grass, hastily re-entered the house, and recounted the ordeal to my cousin. The fright escalated when knocks on the door followed. An update, nearly a year later, reflects sporadic scares. With a different cousin sleeping over the kitchen, it became the epicenter of strange occurrences. The kitchen light turned on repeatedly despite assurances from my cousin. A subsequent unsettling incident involved the back entrance slightly opening and the light mysteriously turning on. Paranoia set in, but my mother and I have since moved into a new house. Despite being mostly alone due to their work commitments, nighttime continually invokes fear and unease. The specters of my past experiences cast long shadows over my present solitude. I was in my early 30s, a father of 3 small children. My wife, now ex, and I have a 5-year-old daughter, 3-year-old son, and 10-month-year-old son. My father's mother passed away, but due to her lengthy illness was in a care home for 3 to 4 years before this story took place. A few weeks after she passed, I had been working as a bartender, often arriving home at 2 to 3 a.m. One such early morning I laid awake in bed, but to be honest I was likely in and out of sleep mode. I looked out my bedroom door and saw my grandmother smiling at me. She was somewhat radiant, but also not fully clear to me. Not sure of the word, maybe translucent. She was not walking, but flowing effortlessly. It was like I was paralyzed. I couldn't speak. I couldn't wake up my wife beside me. After looking at me for what seemed like much longer than it was, the bedroom across from ours had 2 older kids in the bunk. She visited each kid, seemingly touching them and kissing their foreheads. She turned to leave that room, facing me once again, and I felt an overwhelming peace. It was as if she had conveyed to me that she was happy with me, and she continued on to leave my sight. She turned to enter my youngest child's room. We had a child or baby monitor in this room, and he woke up and was making baby noises. This woke up my wife. She asked what was going on, and I was sitting up, and I guess from the look on her face it quickly helped her accept what I began to tell her. A few weeks later, my daughter began telling us about her dreams at breakfast or lunch. She would speak of Grandma and how she would visit us. My 4-year-old daughter gave me some more mature details of family struggles that my mother never knew about, and that my father had all but forgotten, as it's from his youth. So do I believe? I'm not sure what's out there, but something definitely happened, and it wasn't just in my head. This all started a number of years ago. I want to say around 2019, when my son was born. We'd just moved to this new apartment in the city that we live in. I don't want to disclose where. Strange stuff would always happen, but we'd assume it was just our forgetfulness, or try and play it off, like losing our keys, and then somehow finding them in the middle of the floor. One particular occurrence was when my husband lost his wallet. He was just about to leave for work and had sworn he'd left it in his pocket of his suit. But when he went to check his suit, it was no longer there. He spent about an hour and blamed pretty much everyone in the house that they had taken or moved it to try and be funny. But after the search continued, and everyone had checked everywhere, including his suit, we found it in his suit pocket, where he claimed it hadn't been. Everyone, and I mean everyone in the house, had looked inside it, so none of us could ascertain exactly how it made it back, as the suit was constantly within vigil distance from everybody. That still stumps us. But the answer might lie before us. You see, after my youngest son was born, I got into the nasty habit of getting addicted to video games. One game in particular that took a great toll on my time was The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. It's a fantastic game, by the way, but I digress. My son would wake up at all hours of the night, and my husband, having a demanding job in the city, would need me to be here with him to put him back to sleep. It would be my nightly routine that every time he woke up, I'd put him in the baby carrier, grab my Switch controllers, and gently rock him back to sleep. This could take anywhere between half an hour to an hour after a feed, and I was fine to be stimulated enough by playing a game to not fall asleep while trying to put him to sleep. It was around one of these times, in the pitch darkness of the living room, that I heard a noise coming from down the hall. To give you an explanation, our living room was at the end of the apartment, and the bedrooms were towards the door. There was only one corridor that led between every room and the living room at the end. I was in the living room playing the Switch, sound muted, and the silent sound of our apartment with the distant noises of the city underneath were everything I could hear. But this creak of the floorboard was extremely tangible. I could hear the movement. Creak, creak, creak. It sounded like my husband was coming to say something, which was unusual as he really liked his sleep, especially as he was very tired because he had a lot of work. I waited, assuming he was going to come, as I was in a particularly riveting part of my game. I casually glanced over to the open doorway, and he wasn't there, so I just carried on playing. A few minutes went by, and I wondered why he hadn't come yet. So, at an appropriate time, I switched off the Switch and went over to the bedroom, placed my son into his crib, and looked over to my husband that was fast asleep. I asked myself why he had walked this way and not come over. Maybe he peeked his head in when I wasn't paying attention and left it at that. When he came back from work later that evening, and we were having a nice long conversation about his day and my day, I casually slipped in that I hadn't seen him in the night. He asked me what I meant, and I said, well, I heard you walk this way, but when I looked over, you weren't there. Did you try and scare me and then gave up or something? He looked at me perplexed, claiming he had never done such a thing, and he wouldn't be wasting his time trying to scare me when he was absolutely exhausted from work. Unsure if he was just playing with me or not, I let it slip. A few days later, though, the same thing happened. I was playing Switch, quite groggy this time, sleepier than the time before to say the least, and I would hear footsteps, this time slightly faster. But instead of ending near the door, they actually came into the room. That took me out of my stupor, and I was more awake than ever. The noise stopped just past the open doorway, and I was very, very scared. I ran back to the room, consequently waking up my son, and the screaming started all over again. But I chose not to play any games, and rocked him back to sleep standing in the corridor, waiting for him to fall asleep so that I could get back to bed and cuddle my husband terrified. The final thing that happened was actually during the day. I was making lunch for my son and I when I heard someone walking on the hallway. I looked over the hallway, which I had to kind of pull my head back in order to do, and didn't see anyone. As it was daylight, I was more brave than I was at night, and feeling a little bit pissed off, wondered who it could be. For a fleeting instant, I wondered if my son had learned to walk, which would be unlikely, as he was very young and hadn't even started crawling yet. I walk out into the hallway and see nothing, but the sound was still approaching me. It was in that moment, I'm unsure if out of desperation or fear, that I screamed that whoever it wasn't funny, and that I don't want it here near me, my husband or son anymore. The sound stopped pretty much instantly, and we didn't have any repeat noises for the time we stayed in that apartment.